Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the web seminar, New Online Research Approaches to Product Naming. Our featured speaker is Brendan Light of BuzzBack Market Research. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the event. We will reserve time at the end of the presentation to answer any of them. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible during our Q&A portion. I want to remind attendees that they can ask questions by typing them into the Q&A part of the toolbar located on their screen. This session will be recorded and archived so that you can refer to it at any time after the live seminar, or refer to other colleagues who might not have been able to join us today. We will be sending you a link following this seminar where you can retrieve this archived file. Now about today's featured speaker. Brendan leads research development and best practices for BuzzBack. In addition to continually improving the quality of the quantitative and qualitative methodologies and analytics of BuzzBack's research offerings, he also pioneered the award-winning and patent-pending eCollage and verbatim viewer and leads the future development and research strategy for BuzzBack. He continues to focus on leveraging the transformative powers of the Internet to involve respondent engagement, operational efficiency, and visualization of analytics and insight. Brendan has over 15 years of client and research supplier-side experience, having also served as research director for Gray Interactive and as global director of IPSIS ASI Interactive. And with that said, I'd like to hand it over to Brendan Light.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your time today. What we're going to be discussing today is unique and alternative approaches to helping in naming of brands and products. And our goal really is to take a fresh approach to not only thinking about how to pick the ideal names, but to also really understand what it is about those names that is connecting with consumers and customers. So each of the case studies we're going to walk through today is really going to highlight, to a certain extent, you'll see some emphasis on the names themselves, but we really try to put a lot of focus as well on understanding what is the connection with those names. What do they mean to people? So to start with, my name is Brendan. Now, you most likely have not met me and most likely have not seen me. So just the name alone most likely conjures up some type of imagery in your head. That is probably based on other Brendans you've known, either personally or the handful of celebrities with that name. But it does definitely carry imagery without actually knowing anything about me. There's a really neat website out there called Namepedia. It's a baby name database to actually see what different names, how popular they've been over time. And so I put my name in there. The goal here to show you is that depending on when you basically came into consciousness of people named Brendan, you probably have a different association based on how many you saw around you. And so the name has different meanings depending on different contexts, and it means different things to different people. If I knew where you lived, if you were in the United States and around what time, I would probably have a sense of how many Brendans were around you, and then probably have a clue about how you perceive that name and what it means. So I can look at it by year and by geography. And actually, this website has their own surveying for people's names to understand what people think. And you may or may not have these opinions of these names, but the point is we definitely do have opinions about names and things that they communicate. So our goal today is to try to understand how can we understand those associations for our very unique names we try to come up with for our brands and products. How do we try and understand how they're connecting with people? Now, naming obviously takes place during the product development cycle. And when I was looking for a fancy graphic to show for a product development cycle, I found what has to be the absolute most simplistic notion of product life cycle. And God bless you if this is your image that it can be this simple for you. Most likely it looks like one of these highly cyclical life cycle images. And they're very complex and they enter many different stages and are often iterative, as is intended to be indicated by the circles here. Well, naming itself within that cycle has its own cycle in which we try to ideate names and come up with some that would potentially work for us. We try to understand what those names mean to people, and then we try and narrow down and pick one or two that we can try and take to market. So what I'm going to do today is walk through 3 different tools that we have that can help you address your needs at the different stages when you're trying to name your products and brands. The first one is a tool that we call IDQ. It's a proprietary tool that we developed, and it really is meant to address early stages when you're trying to generate as many names as you can. Oftentimes it is in addition to professional naming services that you're using. Sometimes the effort simply can't afford to use a professional service, so it's a way of trying to create very quickly and effectively not just many names, but then IDQ also serves an additional function of being able to help you sort the good names from the bad names, and it's all done in real time. So for the study today, what we're going to talk about is a concept we tested where we do this all online. We were trying to evaluate a new laptop concept that had TV functionality built into it. And respondents were reacting to 10 other names that other respondents had actually submitted, and then respondents are able to add their own names as well. So we talked with 200 people in the US and 200 in the UK. This was the concept that was shown to the respondents. So routinely we asked them to react to just this. So in this early stage, obviously, it's a very rough description. There's no images that we're able to show people. We're just trying to get a sense at this point that for this type of a product, what are the kinds of names people want? And so what's really important at this early stage is not to get overly literal. Sometimes there is a very great literal name to walk away with, but largely in this early stage, what you're trying to do is understand how people are internalizing this type of a concept and reacting to it with a type of name. Are people reacting highly functionally, or is it benefit-oriented, and what are the kinds of words they're using as a name to describe those reactions? So what I'm first going to do is explain a little bit about how IDQ works. So that the first respondent has something to react to when they enter, we actually will seed the IDQ database with some ideas. In this execution, those are names. Those names can either come from clients, agencies, or through a very brief survey of a handful of respondents with a traditional open end, just to get some names to start the engine revving. At that point, a respondent enters the IDQ experience. The database of the IDQ names has a proprietary algorithm that is set to select, in this case, 10 names out of the database to show to a respondent for evaluation. So obviously for the first respondent, we had to seed 10 ideas into the study. One at a time, those ideas are evaluated by a respondent, and there are several questions, which I will demonstrate in a second, that people reacted to for each one of those ideas. Those responses are fed back into the IDQ engine, and at this point, the IDQ engine is now updated, and the algorithm recalculates everything based on the new scores it has at this point. After they have reacted to the 10 ideas, the respondent has the opportunity then to submit their own idea into the IDQ database. So once they've submitted it, the database grows with the submitted ideas, and now that idea is available to all subsequent respondents as well. So at that point, other respondents can follow, and the cycle continues. People evaluate ideas, submit new ideas, et cetera, et cetera. We find that typically 2 out of 3 people will be adding a new idea as a project goes along, and so the database does grow quite prolifically, and we're continuing to evaluate those ideas as the project continues. So this is actually what a person sees when they're evaluating within IDQ. The top of the screen, we show the prompt that really was trying to generate the name. And this can be with or without the stimulus. And so here on the second line, we're seeing one of the 10 names that was served up. So Media Pro in this example is a name that another respondent had submitted, and then we're asking them how overall liking for this name and appropriate for this name. Now, those scores are the ones that are taken back into the IDQ engine, and it's how we go about doing a sorting exercise to help you identify the better and the worse responses. After they have gone through those 10 names, they are then asked if they have their own name they'd like to submit. As I had mentioned, 2 out of 3 people are submitting ideas at this point. And again, those are available for the next respondent starting in the IDQ. So for this project, what we wanted to do, since it's a very Darwinian approach actually in terms of how the algorithm works, and it really tries to help us identify what the stronger ideas are, and it favors those for evaluation so we can get better discrimination amongst the best ideas. So for reporting, what we're showing here is the top names that had at least 10 exposures in each market, and you can basically see the nature of the names that people had submitted. Now, what's interesting, as I had mentioned in the beginning, we had supplied, from the client had supplied 10 names to begin the process, yet in the list of these top names, only one of those was an originally client-seeded name. The rest of the most favorable names in the top of the list were actually provided by other consumers. So it's a really interesting way to see how your notion of the appropriate name for the product relates to that of the consumers. We then collapsed all of the names in the IDQ engine to look at them in a coded way, much as we would code open ends, and reran the algorithm against those coded names. And what's interesting then to see is how those themes develop their own scores. And for a laptop product with an added TV function, it is TV and television names. Those are names that people had submitted which literally include either TV or television in them, was the highest scoring of the themes. And laptop actually was the 3rd top scoring of all the themes. So it's a very good way of identifying, as I said, not just the literal names that people come up with, but how are they internalizing that concept and playing it back to you, and that playback is in the way of a suggested name. So again, you're not just getting names, but how people are reacting to and internalizing the names for the products. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we did supply from the beginning 10 seed ideas into the database to get things started. And here are those 10 seed names. And what's interesting is when we look at the range of all of the ideas that were submitted, the client-seeded ones really nestled right in the middle. There were 29 names that did better than all of the seeded ideas, and only 19 of the consumer-generated names fared worse than all of the client-generated seed ideas. So what we got out of this was an amazing 210 unique names that were sorted in 3 days. And based on the algorithm, we were able to identify scores ranging from 19 to 100. It's an index-based score, so 100 is simply the top faring name in the study. But it really is the power of the tool to not just generate, but to help you sort and understand immediately what are the better and what are the worst names. We discovered that each of lap or laptop and TV or television, they each were accounted for about 30% of the names that were generated in the study, with a very small amount of overlap between those two. There were 10% of the generated names referenced portability of the product, and a small percentage of it really focused on the hybrid nature of these two products coming together. So now I'm going to talk about a second case study focusing on a different area of naming needs, and that really is now that we have these names, these could be names that come out of an IDQ exercise that we identify as top names, or they could come from a variety of resources. But what we want to do now is get a much better understanding of what do these names communicate to people. So much as I said in the beginning, by just looking at my name and the imagery that comes to mind based on what that word means to you, we want to understand the same thing with consumers when we look at products and the names we'd like to attach with them. Oftentimes, when we're developing a product concept, we in our own mind have a notion of how we hope a consumer will internalize what that product means, what the benefits are. And we have a hope also that the name we pick will strongly reinforce that notion. And so the goal of using eCollage in this area is to see how good of a match we have. Is the name suggested mapping that imagery the way we want for consumers? So we did a study where we wanted to evaluate two potential names for a sleep aid medication, and just to get a sense, are these names communicating to people the imagery we're hoping that the product will create in people's minds? So we spoke with 403 people in the U.S. who have used a sleep aid in the past 6 months and wanted to get a notion for them of individually, we did this in monadic and split cell, so people either evaluated Noctex or Zipima. And so to find out what does that name mean to them. The question that we had asked people to try and get this response is in the text below. I'm sure you can read it much faster than for me to read it out for you. But we try to get very detailed so that we can try and capture as many areas as possible and try to include as much probing within the collage exercise itself. We want people to consider the many aspects of a name that we're trying to evaluate. Again, this was done monadically. People either reacted to the name Noctex or Zipima. Here is the actual collage product and how it works. We provide to our respondents libraries of images, and those images are distinct for each study with imagery that's most appropriate to the needs of that study. For this project, there were 141 images provided. So the respondents can go through and pick whichever images they want for whichever reason they feel reflects the name they're reacting to. We gave no prompting beyond simply the name and the product type. So the question where we asked, how does this name, what does this imagery mean to you? What imagery comes to mind with this name for a sleep aid is all the more prompt that we had given people. We didn't want to cloud their response with a lot of details from a concept. We really wanted to focus on the name itself. So consumers can go through and put whichever images they want on a canvas, selecting from the libraries. Once they have put images on the canvas, they're free to move them around. You can resize the images. You can even, if you wish, repeat multiple images, which is a very distinct property from doing any offline collaging techniques. So we capture this information for all consumers. We know which pictures everybody used, where they placed them, all of the properties of that collage canvas. And we can reproduce that either quantitatively or visually as a completed collage. So here is an example of one consumer's collage in reaction to Noctex. Now, we never just do a collage exercise on its own. We always have several probes afterwards to have them help us decode what that personal collage meant to them. These tend to be quite verbose. If you were a participant in our last webinar, we demonstrated how the collage typically generates twice as many words in open ends as does a flat open end asking about what the name would mean to people. So it's a very good way of generating a lot of understanding of what the name means to consumers. The types of collages people make are very creative. It's actually a fun, interactive way for people to engage and actually be more thoughtful within a study. And people are very intentional about the images they pick and the placement and any adjustments that they're making to the collage itself. We've done these studies across a wide variety of product types, a wide variety of age types. It tends to be a very powerful way for brands to get an understanding even on the simple visual level of, is my name communicating the types of imagery that I'm hoping it will communicate? So quantitatively, if we look at what the top image selections were for people, there were quite a few that rose to the top for both of the names that were shared. And when we asked people about what their collages meant, we had very consistent themes that were all right on target for us. So we know both of these names are good potential names at this point. But when we start to look at the imagery that is unique for each of these names, that are used predominantly for one but not the other, this is where we start to see some real separation between these names, and we start to have a winner amongst two good names. So the Noctex name actually has a greater association with sleep than does Zipima, which for a certain proportion of the respondents actually conjured up the opposite notion of what they were looking for in terms of energy. So from the study, what we were able to learn was both of these were good names, and they both, for the broad audience, communicated the type of imagery we wanted. But Noctex versus Zipima had a definite advantage to us in terms of helping us understand which name we prefer, because it communicated more consistently the type of imagery in people's minds that we were trying to associate with this product. We have been able to do this across, again, as I had said, many product categories, and find that our brands that we work with are getting a lot more information about understanding that mapping between a name and the product itself, and it's very helpful in helping you move along that product cycle continuum. The third area that I'm going to speak about this morning is about when we're getting a little further in that cycle and we're trying to focus down on those names and ideally settle on one or two or three names that we would like to consider for a final name choice. And there's lots of reasons why we might have struggles with a final name. And so we don't really aim for coming out of this exercise with one name. What we want to do is give you several names so you can go out and do trademark and legal research against to make sure you can use it, but we want to make sure they're the strongest names possible. So how do we understand which are actually the strongest of your final consideration set to look to move forward with? This is actually a very unique tool in that our goal is to move away from a traditional exercise of having people react to names in a text list format and better understand how do those names work in the environment in which it's actually going to live, which is typically on product or in communications. And so to understand the relationship of the name to the rest of the imagery we're putting forth to consumers through our communications and making sure we have that good synchronization. And in doing this, what we're doing as a benefit from a research perspective is we're de-emphasizing the focus on the name so that we're not really calling attention to consumers that what we're trying to do is pick the best name. What we're trying to do is have a holistic understanding from a packaging perspective in this case, a holistic understanding of the name in context with the other elements. So here we spoke with 250 people about a new cookie type, a new package cookie type we're trying to get to market and find the best name to go with the other elements that we're selecting. Before we had them go about configuring the package for this product, we gave them a flat text description of what this product would be. And so after reading this, we then have them go about creating their own packaging. So this is actually what the consumer saw. It's as stripped down of product packaging as we could have. And then we asked them to go through and select an item from 4 different categories of packaging elements. They can go through in any order. They don't have to go top to bottom. And in fact, at any point, if they decide that one element is not working for them as well as they'd like, they have the opportunity to go back and make changes to the product, its packaging itself. So that at the end, what we're doing is we're understanding how does a name work across potentially hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of other communication options to find out what names float high across combinations, and then how do they work with various elements beneath it. And so it's a good way of understanding both the name power on its own as well as the name power in conjunction with other packaging or communication efforts that you have. And again, with this, we follow it up with probes to help us understand why they picked the names that they did pick. We had an overwhelming response in this selection where the 4 different graphic name treatments that the client was considering, by the time they got into the configurator, we had a very clear choice of the preferred name and name treatment. And over half of all respondents picked Snackadoos as the name for this product. What was interesting was with the name that we got very specific feedback in terms of the name itself did represent a fun and a tasty snack, yet even being the most favored one, it did not communicate the health aspect as well as some of the other names did, but the fun and tasty nature of the name was more powerful than the weakness as a health communication. So with all of those various packaging combinations that respondents could make, there were 160 unique package combinations made. And yet out of those, nearly half of the unique combinations had the name Snackadoos in it. So Snackadoos, regardless of the other elements, was the strongest name. And when we look at, of those 160, just at the top 3, we see that Snackadoos is consistently the top name regardless of other packaging elements. So with this, what we learned was that Snackadoos is clearly the most powerful of all the names that were under final consideration. Now with this, we often counsel our clients not to rush to market with that name, but to understand what that connection is and why it is the most powerful name. So in this case, we have a very clear winner, but oftentimes it's not so clear out of 10, 15 names which one that you want to move forward with. So by understanding in our follow-up probes why it is that people like a name, it does help us in making a final recommendation of a few names coming out of the configurator that are most likely to prove successful for whichever product that you're looking at. So what I really wanted to communicate across all of these various efforts is there are many different options available to help beyond very standard traditional approaches to get unique learnings on naming. You should not think of naming as a monolithic one-size-fits-all type of effort. There are different aspects of naming in terms from beginning of trying to ideate and create names all the way up through picking them that have unique characteristics that deserve unique research approaches to best optimize what it is. And what is really exciting for us is the ability to create these online tools that create a more engaging environment that not only allow you to create a product that specifically relates to the stage that you're at, but to do it in a way that is far more engaging than traditional techniques are, so that people are not only commenting on the specific stage that you're at with the type of information you want, but are doing so in a much more engaged way. The thoughtfulness that comes through is much stronger, and so it gives our clients a lot more confidence that they're getting the right information at the right time. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
At this time, I just want to remind the audience that they can type in their questions by putting them into the Q&A part of the toolbar. We'll just wait moments while they do that. one of our first questions. How long do each of these approaches take to complete?
It actually kind of depends. I hate giving such a vague answer as that. It can be very, very short, which is probably the answer most people are looking for, in just a matter of days. But depending upon what your objectives are, you may actually want it to be a little bit longer. For instance, the IDQ exercise, as I mentioned, was done in 3 days. But you may actually want to take a much more iterative approach to that. So, for example, what you might do is run 100 people through it and identify what your strongest names are, and then take 10 of those strong names and treat those as seed names for a second round, and then continue to go through the process, and then at the very end, be very sure you have the absolute strongest generated names coming out of that exercise. And that can take up to a week or two to do, but it really is not a matter of being a slow process inherently, but of an intentional choice we might make to expand the time frame in which we're in field. So we're in field for 3 days, but the projects to start finish in terms of from proposal to report is typically a 2 to 3 week process from proposal to final delivered report. The collaging type of exercise is about the same amount of time. We are typically in field 3 or 4 days. And again, the project flow from start to finish is about 2 or 3 weeks. The configurator exercise would be the one that might take a little bit longer, and that's not a function of the fielding time, but that the nature of having to include the intended production graphics in the experience typically takes some more preparation time, and so it's a matter of how long it takes to traffic the needed elements from your design agencies to us, and then to get them programmed into the application. And we see that typically adds about a week in total to the time frame.
Okay, looks like that's it for the questions in our Q&A booth. At this time, I want to thank Brendan Light with BuzzBack Market Research and everyone joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this web seminar, and we'll be sending you a link to the archived version shortly. If you have any further questions or need further information, feel free to go to www.buzzback.com or send an email to Brendan Light at brendan@buzzback.com. Again, thank everyone for your time. Have a great day.